In the recent support for DBT12 Bruce, I just smashed everything in and it's just really horrible. Luckily, with a few fine-tuning as well as some inspiration from other content creators, I'm proud to actually come down to this list. It's actually a very refreshing way to play Bruce. This video is sponsored by Phoenix Pharos Cards. If you need supplies of singles or splits for Cardfight Vanguard, especially the ones in the video, do check out Phoenix Pharos Cards today, and as a bonus, use the promo code MetaNerd to get an amazing 5% discount. And with that being said, let's get on with the video. Greetings YouTube, welcome back to the MetaNerd channel. I'm Marcus, bringing you another video for Cardfight Vanguard Willdress. In this video, we'll be going through my deck profile for Bruce with the DBT12 support. Now, there's only 2 card support for Bruce for DBT12, and only one of them is so much better than the other, sadly, but it does change how Bruce is being played. Like the previous deck profile of Bruce that you see me, I play like a variation of a pure Diabolos deck, but I find it a little bit underwhelming because the hand size is just not really that great. With the recent support, it does actually conserve the hand for Bruce and makes it easier to play rather than the previous version where the hand just keeps getting smaller and smaller for some reason. And of course, I did get some ideas from another content creator, which I will link his bio down in the comment section when we go into the cards in question. Bruce is a deck that I personally really like, and it's basically the go-to deck when I go to tournaments. Every time you see me, it's either going to be Bruce or any other Dark States deck, but it's most probably going to be Bruce unless I don't think Bruce can perform as well inside a tournament, or I am just testing other stuff. Without further ado, let's take a look at the deck profile for Bruce and what are the fun changes I made for my profile for DBT12 Bruce. So this is the overall deck profile for my DBT12 Bruce. It's largely still the same with a few notable changes, and that few notable changes is of course going to be the Geno, the new grade 2. A lot has been changed as compared to the previous Bruce before DBT12, and it just basically allows Bruce access to a much more deadlier late game as well as the mid game, because Bruce going first is not doing a lot when you are on turn 3. It's just giving final rush, and we don't really have a lot of units that really take advantage of the final rush turn as of yet, because most of the insane skill are still locked behind final burst, which will only work if you are going second on turn 3. They are largely still the same, especially the trigger lineup, but it's more so on what attackers you want to put as well as the boosters. So of course, right out the bat, I will need to say I am playing 4 of the normal PG, and I do not really run the 1 Elementaria Sanctitude. The main reason for that is that Geno is able to get a normal unit card, which Elementaria isn't really a normal unit. So in the off chance where you really did soul charge the Elementaria Sanctitude, it's basically a dead card. To actually maximize the chances of me getting a PG from the soul with Geno's skill, it flows much better and you don't really need to face the issue of not being able to get a PG. With that small changes out of the way, let's just drill down into what this deck actually does and actually how it plays as well as function. I'm telling you, this is probably going to change a little bit in terms of how we are going to play Bruce. Of course, I'm sure I'm not the only one that actually found out what cards run well in this card. I'm sure there are other people out there. If you manage to figure this out, congrats to you. You are the best player in the world. I'm not saying that sarcastically. I am genuinely impressed with these ideas that you guys come out with. First off, of course, is the trigger lineup. It's still the heavy 8 critical as well as 3 draw lineup. Power isn't really an issue in this deck, so of course maximizing the critical is the way to go. When I say power is not that issue, is that generally the whole column that you will be attacking is going to be 23k at the minimum, and this is without final burst yet. Most likely Geno's column is going to be the smaller one, which is only at 23, but still, if you start personal riding, that whole column is going to be at 33, so power is definitely not going to be a problem. This deck hits like a truck no matter if you are personal riding or not. Fronts are okay, but they are more so for the 20k shield instead of the front trigger. As I mentioned, the power is not really an issue inside this deck, so it's not really as impactful. It does impact a lot if the opponent is at 5 damage, but it's generally not really that impactful. You could run the fronts, but I'm telling you, it's not as good as 8 critical. Draws is here to basically just get more pieces as well as defenses to the hand. I mean, the draws are 10k shield anyway, so they are really good in getting stuff to hand as well as defending some of the pokes from the opponent. Heals are going to be running the normal heals, as you know, counter heals are not really that great. If you go against those decks that your counter heals can't really activate their skills, then the regular heal trigger is much more better for now. And what's more, most of your triggers are going to be in Diabolos, and you are able to call them out for a cheap 5k booster. Effect triggers are mostly just 4k, so not really that impactful, and since they are Diabolos, very nice. The deck doesn't really need the effect critical trigger, which is good news for some people out there that do not have access to the critical trigger. But of course, since we do not really have another Diabolos critical trigger, it's whatever. I mean, if we do have another Diabolos critical trigger, then for sure I will be running that critical trigger instead of the effect one. In no way are you gonna call out that effect critical trigger, because you will need that effect critical trigger for defense anyway. So the only off cases where you are able to call out the effect critical trigger is by Julian's skill, since by the time Julian attack, you are in your battle phase, which you are then activated final rush or final burst. So it doesn't really matter if you have non-Diabolos units on the field at that time. It's just really good. For the OT, we're gonna run the red OT, which is going to allow something to restand, which will then squeeze out a extra attack from a already disgusting attack formation of Bruce. And this OT does have a really good synergy with Eden, because Eden does get a crit upon restand. So who doesn't like a double restanding critical trigger rearguard? It's really disgusting. Of course, you could run the other OT. The other OT that you could consider running is the blue OT. It's just that good for you to be able to get a defensive stuff or another key pieces to the hand. Yeah, the blue OT is workable in this situation, but I do prefer the red OT just a little bit more. So yeah, pretty standard stuff at this point. Do let me know if you think front triggers or some other OT needs to be run in the deck, and what are the implications on the deck. I find 8 critical triggers to be much better. Next, for the Rideline, nothing much has been changed for the Rideline. It's still the very first Rideline that Bruces get. I wish I can play with a new Rideline, but alas. It's not to say that the Bruce Rideline is not that great. It's just I've been playing with the same Rideline as long as Willdress is a thing. So the Bruce Rideline works well enough for, you know, in terms of draw as well as soul resources and, you know, hitting for numbers. Bruce, I think, is the only Rideline out there where the opponent doesn't really want to guard, because even if the opponent decided to throw down a 15k shield when you are attacking with Steve and a booster behind, because Steve does superior call the starter to the back row, so it basically discourages the opponent to no guard in most cases. Of course, if you go up to Richard, then maybe the opponent will want to guard if you don't throw down a booster. However, even though you are getting like quite a bit of soul resources, but keep in mind here is that you have to be very careful in terms of how much soul you are using in this build, as opposed to the previous build where you use a lot of Counterblast. This build uses a lot of soul instead of Counterblast. Since Counterblast is much more exploitable by the opponent, I just think that maybe focus more on soul blasting instead of Counterblasting would be the way to go. It does works really well. Steve the Great One is the most important unit in the soul, because you will most likely always target him to be called from the soul or get back to hand. We don't have a lot of Great Ones in this deck, so Steve is one of those Great One that even before Viaman's Bruce is like that one Great One that will most definitely pop up every single map due to how good of a Great One he is. He's just really great as a 13k booster due to the lack of really good Great Ones and the generally very low Great One count that we run inside Bruce deck. Richard is the last unit that you will want to call, because he's just basically a 15k attacker, which you have other better units to act as an attacker. Eden, Gino, as well as Julian, those are much better attacker than Richard. But of course, if you don't have those attackers, he's a very decent unit to be called, and you will definitely want to intercept him away after that, because he's not really that great. Most of the time I just soul blast him away with other skills that basically wants me to soul blast. So yeah, he's not that great, but still very good in very niche situation. Matt the starter will always be soul blasted away because he is a grade 0. He really does not do anything in the mid to late game. His only function to just being called by Steve and put the soul with Richard. That's basically it. You can just Soul Blast him away. It's not going to do a whole lot, I would say. Nothing much to talk about the Rideline. It's pretty much standard at this point. Next, for the great ones, we have the boosters of the deck, which is 4 Heidi and 3 Stephanie. Only 7 boosters, which is kind of low in this deck. But then again, due to how much draw you are going through to the deck, as well as soul charging to Superior Call, they do show up like really often. Heidi is the single most powerful booster that we currently have for Bruce. Not only is she a 13k booster, she is also an 18k booster on the second boost, which is quite significant for you to actually hit numbers. Like I said, this deck hits like a truck, so having that extra 5k is really good in terms of forcing your opponent to just throw down their hand to guard. Stephanie, of course, you already know what Stephanie does. It basically just gives Bruce the 5k power on the opponent's turn 2 for an 18k base Vanguard. Some decks can't really handle a 18k base Vanguard, so she is the priority unit to be retired by the opponent if the opponent does have retiring skills or board sniping skill. But that's okay, because it basically just means that your other units are safe from the opponent's board sniping skill, if of course they do have any. And keep in mind here is that most decks out there do have a limited number of board retiring skills, so with Stephanie actually taking up 1 retire skill is actually not that bad. It means that your other units are basically safe. Of course, the opponent does not have any retiring skills, then it's just a bonus. Having the ability to throw 5k less shield is just gonna make your hand even better. Trish, of course, can be considered to run if you do not want either Heidi or Stephanie. I think you should definitely want to run Heidi. Stephanie is the one that most people might find it a little bit awkward, and due to how many Gandivas out there, yeah, most people do not really like Stephanie. You could opt to run Trish, but generally the only problem is that Trish does not gain the shield before your final rush, so she is a little bit awkward, I would say, and she can't really intercept from the back row. If she is able to intercept from the back row, then maybe I could consider running her over Stephanie, but generally I think Stephanie is still a much better option. She just provides a distraction as well as helping you have an easier time guarding the opponent's stuff, especially those decks that generally poke you to death. It's just really good. Next for attackers are the usual boys out there, Gino, Eden, as well as Patrick. Attackers in this deck is mostly personal preference, I would say. There's really no right or wrong on which unit you would want to run inside Bruce. Ratios as well as choices can vary between Bruce players. It's basically up to you, but I think Gino at 4 is definitely the way to go due to how good Gino is. Gino is a very powerful choice in getting your normal units from soul to hand, as well as be very aggressive, especially when you are going first on turn 3. Since you will be at final rush on turn 3, Gino is basically a safe choice to call out to deal damage. He's just really good, and since at the end of that turn he's just basically going back to the hand anyway, he's generally a very safe choice to run at max copies. The main cards that you want to get from the soul is basically just gonna be your personal right, PG, as well as Steve, or any other attackers that you might be lacking and you have too many Genos in your hand. Then sure, get either a Julian or Eden or Patrick. Those are really solid options depending on how your soul looks like, I would say. If your soul has a lot of important units to be called, then Julian, and if you have abundance of soul, then you could consider getting Patrick to just burn some soul to kill off some of the opponent's rearguard. You could also consider keeping Gino into the soul without getting anything from the soul to just increase your soul count for the next turn, because who knows, you might not get a personal right and you are just lacking 1 soul away, but you have like a really huge hand. Then just keep Gino in the soul, since you do have ways to superior call Gino from the soul as well as get Gino back from the soul anyway. Pretty neat trick to do with Gino. Eden is your anti-rush as well as have access to a very threatening second swing, because upon restand Eden is able to attack for a double critical. So, and if your opponent decided to like rush you down, you can always just call down Eden to start attacking the rearguards, to start deleting some of their rearguards that they have. Eden is really good in doing that. Eden also serves as a distraction for the opponent if their opponent like do not have any rearguard sniping, because no matter what, once people see Eden, they for some reason will definitely try to get rid of it, but little do they know that you have a second copy of Eden in the hand or in the soul, which you can then superior call from the soul with Julian or something. For Patrick is more towards board controlling, and he's a big bit stick or a big hitter, because he is the only one out of the attackers is able to hit for a 20k regardless of any situation. And with the addition to board snipe the opponent 2 rearguards at that is just really really disgusting. However, of course, since Patrick does use 1 soul, and as I mentioned before, this whole deck actually uses more soul than Counterblast, you have to be very careful in terms of managing your soul resources, because you might accidentally use too much and you do not have enough soul to use for Geno, which sometimes could be very bad, I would say, when you want to go for the kill. A little bit weird in terms of the ratio, but it actually does works for me. Eden and Patrick do come up quite a lot, as well as Geno. They do gel well together, I would say. But of course, feel free to adjust the ratio to your liking. I'm still thinking on whether or not if I should adjust a little bit in terms of the ratio, but this ratio actually works really good for me. Next, of course, is 4 copies of Draw Utility Laminia. Now, this card is the card that I mentioned. I get it from another content creator. A very special thanks to BeoTCG for proposing to use Laminia in his own deck profile on his YouTube channel. You should check him out. He's doing God's work, and he does propose some really good options, which I myself didn't really thought about. Laminia, as you guys know, is the cycle card for Dark States. She is able to provide some of the draw power to fetch the pieces, as well as maintaining hand size for defense. Previously, before I even run Laminia, yes, Bruce does has like a very severe hand size issue. Even when you're going for your combo turn or after your combo turn, his hand feels very, very small. With the addition of Laminia, even 1 or twice activation of Laminia is actually really huge for Bruce to maintain the hand size. Now, of course, the cycle isn't really the only thing that works for Bruce. The second skill of Laminia still works really good inside Bruce deck. The reason here is that if you are personal riding and if you are like lacking some of your important units and they are in the soul, you can call out Laminia to pay 1 Counterblast to superior call that specific unit from the soul on top of Laminia, which would then get rid of Laminia as a rearguard, and you have a Diabolos rearguard. Yes, it's a 1-for-1 trade, but it's better than bricking, I would say. And since we do not really use a lot of Counterblast, thanks to not using some of the Counterblast heavy stuff, this card is basically splashable inside this deck. However, of course, only resort to using Laminia's skill as a last resort. She is really good in getting you out of bricking situations, but she's not really that good in any other situation where you are in a winning position. She's not really that good. But if you are going up against decks that has a lot of board retiring skill, for example Gandiva, this card is actually really good in helping you recycle some of your Diabolos unit that is in the soul, which by that time might get retired from opponent's Gandiva, from the Gandiva skill. Once again, be very careful as to not to spam her too much in terms of soul, because once again, this deck focus on a lot of soul blasting skills, so you might not want to spam her too much depending on how the deck goes. You could potentially just use up to 3 times, but discarding her up to 3 times might not be the way to go, because you are minusing 3 soul from your soul, which generally is not that good because the deck doesn't really have a lot of soul charge options anymore, which is kind of sad. Once or twice is definitely enough to keep you going. Thank you BeoTCG for proposing this card. This card is just really good. Thank you very much. Of course, I will link BeoTCG's channel down in the comment section, and if you are watching BeoTCG, thank you very much. Next, of course, is board building the Julian. We're only running 3 Julian. This card, of course, does helps with getting the much needed soul resources and is the only card that actually gives you soul, extra soul that is. Calling stuff from soul is definitely gonna help you conserving your hand, and who knows, you might just get key pieces into the soul for calling or recycling. Like I said, if you do manage to soul charge the PG, you can always get back the PG with Geno's skill, which is really good, but then that is mostly RNG. He by himself is a decent attacker when, of course, you are at 5 damage. For every damage you have, he's gonna get a 2k, so if you are at 5 damage, he's gonna get a 10k power, which effectively makes him a 23k attacker and 33k attacker if you're personal right, which is quite decent. And this card is the godsend when you are going up against board control matchup. For example, once again, Gandiva. You are able to superior call 2 units, which will be more than enough to come back after the opponent just nuke your whole board. So yeah, Julian is really good to make a comeback. He's one of those cards where you will only find him really important during certain matchups. You are able to call this card out since he only needs the Vanguard to be only Bruce. He doesn't really need you to be in Final Rush or Final Burst. You can just call him out on turn 3 to just counterblast 1 and superior call something out for more aggression, which is definitely going to be nice, which is very nice. But of course, it does depends on how many damage you are at when you call him out. Last but not least is the boss unit himself. He's just going to be here for personal riding, and since he is a normal unit, you are able to recycle him him from the soul with Geno, which effectively making you personal ride every single turn in a sense. So with this interaction with Geno, it means that the bathwater is no longer needed, since you are able to just keep on personal riding every single turn, provided of course if you do recycle Bruce from the soul with Geno's skill. So other than that, he's just there for personal riding, nothing really much to talk about. However, I want to take this moment to go through some of the game plan. After going through the deck list, you should by now notice that there's not a lot of stuff that is mandatory for you to, that is a mandatory activation that costs 1 counterblast. The only card that is mandatory for you to pay 1 counterblast is basically Bruce himself. The rest of the counterblast cost is optional. Eden is optional, Julian is optional depending on how your hand is, but still that's only 1 counterblast. If of course you do have a decent field, you no longer need Julian anyway, so pretty optional I would say. Lemina's skill is also optional because most of the time you don't really want to call her. There's only 1 counterblast mandatory for the whole deck, which does reduce the chances of the opponent to counterblast deny this deck. So even if the opponent does decided to completely deny you with counterblast, you are still able to attack for at least 4 times thanks to Geno only cost 2 soul blasts. However, of course, since we are reducing the overall counterblast cost for this deck, it means that the soul cost just went up dramatically. I mean, even before this, we are using the soul like no tomorrow already thanks to Greg soul blasting 2 to countercharge. So right now we are using 2 soul to attack, which I think is a much better cost to spend, with Laminia costing 1 soul, Patrick costing 1 soul, as well as Geno cost 2 soul. So it's technically not really that sustainable, but at least it is a resources that you are able to control rather than the counterblast. So be very careful in terms of how you spend your soul, as you do not have a lot of soul charging units. Technically Julian does soul charge, but it isn't really enough for you to have repeated use of Laminia as well as Patrick. One other aspect is that I mostly will only go for the 5 attack combo when I am at 4 damage and above. While yes, you are able to do the 5 attack combo when you are at least at 2 damage, if you do the 5 attack combo before you reach the 4th damage, it's not really that good. Trust me, it's not really that good because Geno doesn't really gain power himself, so most of the time that whole column is just going to be a 23k attacker. And if you do decided to boost on the first attack and you restand, you are only restanding Geno himself, which does not have any power at all. So you are spending a lot of resources for very little if you are going for the 5 attack before you reach the 4 damage. It's not really a good idea. But having said that, if you're going second and you do want to go for a 5 attack combo on the 3rd turn, taking up to 4 damage isn't exactly a good idea either. So I would say only go for the 5 attack combo when you are personal riding. It's a little bit late, but it's better than you spending a lot of resources for very little, I would say. Based on my experience playing this deck, it's better to do it that way. Be a little bit cautious in terms of how you use your resources, because at the rate you are using your soul, the soul cost is basically just enough for you to go for the 5 attack combo for 2 turns, and that's it. You will no longer be able to attack for 5 attacks after that. But with you still being able to attack for 4 times is still not that bad. And that is all for this deck profile. Do let me know down in the comment section of what do you think of my deck profile for Bruce, and definitely let me know on how you would run your Bruce list. For me, I think this list is pretty much solid. It still needs a little bit of tweaking. And of course, feel free to change the ratio of this deck profile. It's not set in stone. Play the deck how you would want to play. Do like and subscribe if you like this video, and of course during the bell notification icon so that you don't miss a video I upload. With that being said, I'll see you all on the field.
Even when you feel low, you can still go. Even when you feel slow, you can still go. Even when there's no hope, you can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go.